What if the horse nobody wanted carried the key to a fortune no one knew existed? A rancher on the edge of ruin. A mare so broken that bidders turned away in disgust. And a secret buried so deep beneath the earth that it had waited decades to surface. What that terrified horse knew and what she was guarding in the shadows of an old barn would crack open a mystery that changed everything. One family's shame would become their salvation. One animal's terror would become their guide. This is a story about trust, about the things we bury to protect what we love, and about how sometimes the most damaged souls are the ones carrying miracles. If you believe in second chances and the quiet intelligence of horses, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps us share more stories like this one. The high plains of Redstone County stretch out like a faded quilt, all browns and grays stitched together with barbed wire and regret. It is a hard country, a place where the wind never stops and the soil gives back only what you can wrestle from it with blood and stubbornness. The sky hangs low and heavy most days, pressing down on the scattered ranches like a hand you can't shake off. In winter, the cold is a living thing, creeping through jacket seams and bone joints with patient cruelty. In summer, the heat cracks the ground into puzzle pieces that never fit back together, and the grass turns the color of old newspaper. It is beautiful in the way that broken things are beautiful, if you know how to look. If you don't, it just looks empty. The town of Clement, population 342 when everyone's home, sits in the middle of this vastness like a period at the end of a sentence nobody wanted to finish. One main street, two gas pumps that sometimes work, a post office that closes for lunch and doesn't always reopen on time, a diner that serves breakfast all day because that's all anyone can afford, and because the cook, a woman named Dottie with hands like tree roots, never learned to make anything else, and a livestock auction barn on the edge of town, a low-metal building that smells of manure and fear and the particular desperation of people selling things they wish they could keep. The building sits on gravel that crunches under boots like broken teeth. Inside, the fluorescent lights hum and flicker, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that makes even healthy animals look half dead. It was there, on a cold Tuesday in late October, that the mare arrived. She came in a rusted trailer with 3 other horses, all of them thin, all of them used up by work and neglect and time, but she was different. The others still had some fight in them, some spark of defiance or hope flickering behind their eyes. She had nothing. She was small for a ranch horse, maybe 14 hands with a coat the color of charcoal that had once been black. Her mane was tangled and filthy, matted with burrs and mud. Her ribs showed through her sides like the bars of a cage. Her hooves were cracked and overgrown, curling slightly at the toes. But it was her eyes that stopped people. They were huge and dark and so full of terror that looking at her felt like an invasion, like seeing something private and raw that you had no right to witness. She stood at the back of her pen, pressed into the corner, trembling, not from cold, from everything else, from memory, from expectation, from the certain knowledge that pain was coming because pain always came. The auctioneer, a loud man named Gord with a belly that hung over his belt and a voice that could strip paint, took one look at her and shook his head. His face twisted into an expression of disgust, as if the mare's existence personally offended him. "This one's a waste of space," he announced to no one in particular, his voice booming across the barn. "Dangerous, useless. Probably got a screw loose. Won't even look at you." I wouldn't take her if you paid me." The small crowd of bidders, mostly men in worn jackets and feed store caps, nodded in agreement. Nobody wanted a problem horse. Problem horses cost money and time and sometimes blood. They were liabilities, anchors, mistakes you couldn't afford to make when you were already drowning. The bidding started at $50. Nobody raised a hand. 40. Silence, except for the shuffling of boots and the distant lowing of cattle in the holding pens. 30. A man in the back coughed and looked at his phone. Gord sighed, his patience wearing thin like old rope. His face was reddening now, a flush creeping up from his collar. $20 for the black mare. She's sound enough if you got the patience of a saint and the luck of a fool. Hell, she might even be good for something if you can get near her without losing a finger. Still nothing. The crowd had already moved on mentally, eyes drifting toward the next pen where a sorrel gelding stood with better posture and clearer eyes. Mare stood near the back, her arms crossed tight over her chest, her hands shoved under her armpits for warmth. The barn was unheated, and the October cold had teeth. She was 34 but looked older. Work and worry do that. Her father had died 2 years ago suddenly, a heart attack in the barn while he was fixing a gate latch. She'd found him there, slumped against the wall, his tools still in his hands. He left her the ranch and a pile of debts that felt like stones tied to her ankles. She'd been drowning ever since. The bank wanted the land. Her neighbors whispered that she should sell, move to town, get a real job, something stable, something that didn't require gambling everything on weather and cattle prices and prayers that never seemed to get answered. But the ranch was all she had left of him. She couldn't let it go. She had come to the auction hoping to find a gentle older horse she could use for light work, something cheap and steady, something that wouldn't add to her problems. Instead, she found herself staring at the terrified mare in the corner. Mare knew that look. She'd seen it in the mirror every morning for 2 years. The look of someone who'd lost everything and was still somehow expected to keep standing. $10, Gord barked, his face now fully red. "I'm not hauling her back. Somebody take her. I'll give you the damn rope for free." A few people laughed, not kindly. Mara's hand went up before her brain could stop it. Her heart was pounding. She had $43 in her wallet. That was supposed to buy feed for the week. That was supposed to keep her own 2 horses fed until she could figure out what to do next. Gord's eyes snapped to her, surprised. "Sold to the lady in the back. Come settle up. You just bought yourself a project. Good luck with that." As Mare walked toward the office, she heard the whispers behind her, sharp and cutting as barbed wire. "Fool! That horse is broken. She'll kill somebody. Waste of money. Girl doesn't know when to quit." She ignored them. She'd heard worse. She paid her $10, signed the form with a hand that shook slightly, and took the lead rope the handler shoved at her. The rope was frayed and rough, and the metal clip was rusted. When she approached the pen, the mare's eyes rolled back, showing the whites. She backed into the corner so hard she hit the wall with a thud that made Mare wince. "Easy," Mare whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the barn. "Easy now. I'm not gonna hurt you, I promise." The mare didn't believe her. Why would she? It took 20 minutes to get the mare into the trailer. She fought every step, pulling back, rearing, her hooves clattering on the metal ramp like drum beats. Sweat darkened her coat despite the cold. Mare's hands were shaken by the time she finally got the door latched. Her shoulders ached. Her throat was tight. She drove home in silence, the trailer rocking behind her truck. She didn't have a name for the mare yet. She wasn't even sure the mare would survive the night. But something in those terrified eyes had called to her. Something that said, "I'm still here. I'm still trying, even though trying hurts." The ranch was small, 40 acres of scrub grass and a few head of cattle that Mara kept more out of stubbornness than profit. The barn was old, built by her grandfather in the 50s. All weathered wood and a roof that leaked in 3 places she couldn't afford to fix. But it was solid enough. It had stalls and hay and a quietness that Mara hoped might help. The silence of the high plains could be healing if you let it. Or it could drive you mad. She backed the trailer up to the barn and opened the door. The mare exploded out, eyes wild, hooves striking sparks off the gravel. She bolted into the paddock and ran the fence line, back and forth, her breathing harsh and panicked. Her sides heaved like bellows. Foam flecked her mouth. Mara watched from the gate. She didn't try to approach. She just stood there, waiting, her hands gripping the top rail. The wind pushed at her back. The sun was setting, turning the sky the color of a bruise. After an hour, the mare finally stopped running. She stood in the center of the paddock, sides heaving, head low. She looked defeated, exhausted, but still alive. Mara opened the stall door and left it wide. She put fresh hay in the corner and a bucket of clean water. Then she walked back to the house without looking back. She named the mare Sable. It felt right, dark and quiet and holding something underneath, something you couldn't see unless you were patient. For the first week, Sable didn't eat. The hay sat untouched in the corner of the stall, slowly losing its green color. She stood in the back corner, facing the wall, trembling at every sound. The creak of the barn door, the clatter of a bucket, the distant bark of a dog. Everything was a threat. Mara brought her hay, fresh water, soft words. She moved slowly, spoke quietly, never made sudden movements. Nothing changed. On the 8th day, Mara found the hay gone. On the 10th day, Sable drank. On the 14th day, Sable's ears flicked forward when Mara entered the barn. It was progress. Slow, fragile progress. The kind that could shatter if you breathed on it wrong. Mara spent hours each day just sitting in the stall, not moving, not touching, just being there. She read old books out loud, westerns her father had loved, her voice filling the quiet space. She hummed songs her father used to sing while he worked, old country songs about lost love and hard roads. Sable watched her from the corner, suspicious, waiting for the violence that never came. By the end of the 3rd week, Sable would take a piece of apple from Mara's open palm. Her lips were soft and careful, barely touching Mara's skin. Her eyes were still guarded. But it was something. It was a beginning. Mara thought they were turning a corner. Then one morning, everything changed. It was barely dawn, the sky still bruised with purple and gray, the air cold enough to sting. Frost covered the grass in a thin white sheet that crunched underfoot. Mara's breath plumed in front of her face. She walked into the barn carrying a bucket of oats and stopped. Sable was not in her usual corner. She was standing at the far end of the stall, pressed against the back wall. But she wasn't cowering. She was staring. Her body was tense, coiled like a spring, her ears pinned forward so hard they looked like they might snap off. Every muscle in her body was rigid with attention. She was staring at the wall, not at the floor, not at the hay net, not at the water bucket, at the old wooden wall panel, a section of warped planks covered in decades of dust and cobwebs and the brown stains of water damage. "Sable," Mara said softly, "What's wrong?" The mare didn't move. She lifted one hoof and pawed at the wall, once, twice. A hollow, deliberate sound that echoed slightly in the quiet barn. Then she snorted, a sharp, explosive noise that made Mara jump. It wasn't fear. It was insistence. Something was wrong, or something was there. Mara set the bucket down carefully and approached slowly. Sable didn't back away. She didn't flinch. She just stood there, staring at the wall, every line of her body screaming, "Pay attention." She pawed again, harder this time, her hoof scraping the wood with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Mara reached out and pressed her hand flat against the panel. It rattled slightly under her palm, shifting in a way that solid wall shouldn't shift. She knocked on it with her knuckles. The sound came back hollow. Empty. There was space behind that wall, space that shouldn't be there. Mara's pulse quickened. She knocked again, moving her hand across the surface, mapping it. The entire section echoed. The sound was different from the rest of the barn wall, lighter, less substantial. "What the hell?" she whispered. Sable stamped her hoof, her whole body vibrating with urgency. It was the most animated Mara had ever seen her. The fear was gone, replaced by something else. Purpose. Mara ran her fingers along the edges of the panel, feeling for seams, for nails, for anything that would explain this. The wood was old, the boards warped from decades of moisture and heat cycling through the seasons. But they weren't random. They were deliberate. Someone had sealed this section off. And they'd done it carefully. Her neighbor Harlan lived a quarter-mile down the road in a small house that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind, but never did. He was 73, a widower, who'd known her father since they were boys. They'd grown up together, worked cattle together, buried their parents together. He had a workshop full of tools and a mind that still remembered how things used to be built, back when people built things to last. Mara ran to the house, grabbed her phone with shaking hands, and called him. "Harlan," she said breathless, "I need your help. I found something in the barn. Something's wrong." His voice was calm, gravelly from decades of cigarettes he'd finally quit 5 years ago. Be there in 10. He was there in 15 minutes, his old truck rattling up the driveway, the engine knocking in a way that suggested it was held together by prayer and stubbornness. He climbed out slowly, his joints stiff, and walked into the barn carrying a crowbar and a flashlight. His weathered face creased with curiosity. "Show me." Mara pointed. Sable was still there, still staring, still insisting. Harlan knocked on the wall with the back of his knuckles. His eyebrows went up. "Well, I'll be damned." He wedged the crowbar into the seam between two boards and pulled. The wood groaned, a long, painful sound. Nails shrieked as the hoe pulled free, high-pitched and protesting. The first board came off in a shower of splinters and dust that made Mara cough. Behind it was darkness and cold air, a draft that smelled of earth and stone and things long hidden. Harlan pulled off another board, then another. The gap widened, revealing a narrow stone passage, no more than 2 feet wide, built from rough-cut blocks that didn't match the barn's construction at all. The stone was darker, older, the mortar crumbling in places. It was old, older than the barn, older than anything Mara recognized. Mara's breath caught. "What is this?" "I don't know," Harlan said quietly, "but your daddy never mentioned it, and I knew this barn as well as he did." Sable had stopped pawing. She stood perfectly still now, watching them, her dark eyes steady and calm, as if she'd done her part, as if the rest was up to them. Harlan shone the flashlight into the passage. The beam disappeared into blackness, swallowed by the depth of it. It goes back pretty far. You want to go in? Mara looked at Sable. The mare's ears were forward, calm, waiting. Yeah, Mara said. I do. The passage was narrow and cold, the stone walls damp with condensation that made them slick to the touch. Mara went first, Harlan behind her, both of them moving sideways, their shoulders scraping the rock. The air grew colder the deeper they went. It smelled of earth and old wood and something metallic, like the taste of blood in your mouth after you bite your tongue. The passage sloped downward, deeper into the ground, and Mara's boot slipped slightly on the damp stone. The flashlight beam danced ahead of them, revealing nothing but more darkness. After about 20 feet, the passage widened. They stepped into a small chamber, a root cellar carved from the earth and stone. But it had collapsed partially, the ceiling sagging, old beams cracked and leaning at the dangerous angles. The floor was covered in dirt and rubble and the dried husks of roots that had pushed through the walls over decades. And in the corner, half buried under a pile of fallen dirt, was a canvas pack. It was military style, old and stained, but the oilcloth wrapping had kept it mostly dry. Mara's hands were shaking as she pulled it free. It was heavier than she expected. She laid it on the ground, her heart hammering, and untied the leather straps with numb fingers. Inside were 3 leather-bound journals, their covers worn smooth, a stack of old photographs, their edges curled and faded, faces barely visible, and 6 cloth-wrapped bundles, each about the size of her fist. Mara opened one of the journals. The handwriting was familiar. It was her father's, but younger, neater. The loops and crosses were more careful, more hopeful. The first entry was dated 30 years ago. Survey notes, it read, Section 4, North Pasture. Subsurface mineral indicators, iron content high, unusual coloration in creek bed samples. Harlan leaned over her shoulder reading. His face went pale in the flashlight's glow. Your daddy was surveying. For minerals. Mara's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She flipped through the pages. Maps drawn in pencil. Chemical notations she didn't understand. Sketches of rock formations with arrows and question marks. Her father, the man everyone thought was a failure, the man who could barely keep the ranch afloat, who died with debts he couldn't pay, had been doing this, in secret, for years. Why didn't he tell anyone? She whispered. Harlan pointed to a passage near the end of the second journal. His finger trembled slightly. It read, They came today. Lawyers from the mining company. 3 of them in a black car that didn't belong on these roads. They offered to buy the land for pennies. When I refused, they threatened foreclosure. They said they had friends at the bank. They said I'd lose everything. They know what's here. I can see it in their eyes. I can't let them take it. I'm hiding everything until I can find a way to protect the ranch. If something happens to me, I hope someone finds this. Mara, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I wanted to save this place for you. I didn't know how. Mara's throat closed up. Tears blurred her vision. She had to blink them away to keep reading. He knew. He'd been fighting for her even then, fighting alone. She reached for one of the cloth bundles with shaking hands and unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a chunk of rough stone, about the size of her fist. It was a dull, grayish blue, unremarkable, the kind of rock you'd kick aside without thinking. She turned it over in her hands. This is it? This is what they wanted? Harlan took it from her gently, studying it under the flashlight. The beam made the stone look almost luminous. I don't know what this is. But if your daddy hid it this well, if he was willing to die with the secret, it's worth something, maybe worth everything. Mara gathered the journals carefully, treating them like sacred texts. She collected the photos, the 6 samples, wrapping everything back in the canvas pack. They climbed back out of the passage, moving carefully, and emerged blinking in the light of the barn. Sable was standing calmly in her stall, eating hay as if nothing extraordinary had happened, as if she'd simply been waiting for this moment for years. Mara walked over on unsteady legs and rested her forehead against the mare's neck. The horse was warm and solid and real. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for showing me." Sable's ears flicked back, listening, then forward again, calm. Harlan knew a man, a retired geology professor who'd taught at the State University for 30 years and now lived in a small house on the edge of Clement, spending his days identifying rock samples for hobbyists and bored high schoolers who needed extra credit. His name was Elliot, and he had a lab in his garage, a cluttered space full of microscopes and testing equipment and shelves lined with labeled specimens. Mara called him that afternoon. Her voice was shaken. She explained what she'd found, carefully without mentioning minerals or value. She just said her father had left some rocks, and she wanted to know what they were. "For closure," she said, "for understanding." Elliot agreed to see her. His voice was kind, curious. The next morning, Mara drove into town with the samples wrapped in a towel on the seat beside her. Her hands were tight on the steering wheel. She hadn't slept. Elliot's house was small and neat, with a garden full of stones arranged by type and color, each one labeled with a small metal stake. He met her at the door, a thin man with white hair that stood up in tufts and thick glasses that made his eyes look enormous. Come in. Let's see what you got." Mara laid the samples on his work table. Elliot picked up the first one, turned it under a lamp, scratched it with a metal pick. His eyebrows rose. He picked up a second, then a third. His hands moved faster. He pulled out a loupe, examining the surface closely. Then he looked at Mara, and his expression had changed completely. "Where did you get these?" "My father's land. He was surveying years ago. I just found his notes." Elliot set the sample down carefully, as if it might explode, as if it might disappear. "Give me 2 days. I need to run proper tests. Spectroscopy, density measurements. But if this is what I think it is, you need to be very careful who you tell." Mara's stomach dropped. "Is it dangerous?" "No," Elliot said. His voice was quiet, serious. "It's valuable." 2 days felt like 2 years. Mara worked the ranch, fed the cattle, mended fence in a fog. She spent hours in the barn with Sable. The mare was different now, calmer. She no longer flinched when Mara entered. She would walk up to the stall door, ears forward, waiting, as if her job was done, as if she'd delivered the message she was meant to deliver and could finally rest. On the 3rd day, Elliot called. His voice was tight with excitement. "Come back, now. Bring those journals." Mara drove into town with her heart hammering against her ribs. Elliot was waiting in his garage, a printed report on the table in front of him, graphs and numbers that meant nothing to Mara. "Sit down," he said. Mara sat. Her legs felt weak. "This ore," Elliot said, tapping the sample with one finger, "is called columbite tantalite. Coltan for short. It's a mineral that contains tantalum and niobium. It's used in almost every high-tech device made today. Phones, computers, medical equipment, aerospace components, military applications. 10 years ago, it was worth a decent amount. 5 years ago, the price tripled because of supply chain issues. Now, with the new trade restrictions and supply shortages, it's worth a small fortune. And your father's land, based on these samples and his survey notes, has a concentration that's unusually high. Very high. Mara's vision blurred. The room tilted. She gripped the edge of the table. How much? If managed correctly, Elliot said carefully, his voice gentle. And if the seam runs as deep as these samples suggest, and if the quality holds, you're looking at millions, maybe tens of millions over time. The room spun. Mara couldn't breathe. I can't, she whispered. This isn't real. This doesn't happen to people like me. It's real, Elliot said. He pushed the report toward her. And people are going to find out. Small towns don't keep secrets. You need a lawyer, a good one. You need contracts and mineral rights specialists. And you need to move fast before someone tries to take it from you. Word spread like wildfire through dry grass. Small towns don't keep secrets, and Clement was no exception. Within a week, everyone knew. The bank manager, who'd threatened foreclosure 6 months ago, suddenly appeared at Mara's door with a smile so wide it looked painful, and a folder full of investment opportunities. The auctioneer, Gord, showed up with a bottle of cheap wine and a story about how he'd always believed in her. Always knew she'd do something special. Always saw potential in her even when times were hard. Mara stood on her porch and listened to them, her face calm, her hands in her pockets. The wind pushed at her back. When they finished their pitches, their promises, their sudden friendship, she smiled. No, thank you. Gord blinked. His smile faltered. No. No to what? To all of it, Mara said. Her voice was steady. I'm not selling. I'm not partnering. I'm not taking investment advice from people who wanted me to fail, from people who laughed at me. Now get off my land. The bank manager sputtered, his face reddening. Gord's expression twisted into something ugly. But they left. Mara hired a lawyer from the city, a sharp woman named Renee, who specialized in mineral rights and land contracts. She wore expensive suits and had a reputation for being ruthless. Together, they negotiated a controlled extraction agreement with a reputable company, one that prioritized environmental care and fair compensation. The first payment arrived 6 weeks later. It was enough to pay off every debt her father had left, enough to fix the barn roof and replace every section of fence, enough to buy quality feed for years, enough to breathe for the first time in 2 years. But Mara didn't stop there. She used the money to fund the town's struggling school, buy new computers and books. She paid for the clinic's new equipment when the old X-ray machine finally died. She bought the diner when it was about to close and hired all the staff back at better wages. And she built the Sable Refuge. It started as an idea, a dream she sketched on napkins late at night. A sanctuary for horses like Sable, the ones nobody wanted, the broken ones, the terrified ones, the ones that people gave up on. Mara bought the land next to her ranch, 60 acres of good pasture with a clean creek running through it. She built stalls and shelters and a covered arena. She hired 2 staff members, both quiet people who understood trauma, who moved slowly and spoke softly. Within a year, the refugee housed 15 horses. Some were old, their working days long past. Some were injured, healing from neglect or abuse. Some were just scared, carrying memories they couldn't explain. Sable became the heart of it. She was no longer the trembling mare in the corner. She walked through the pastures with her head high, calm and steady and sure. The other horses followed her. When a new horse arrived, terrified and broken, Sable would approach slowly, touch noses, stand beside them until they calmed. She was their guide, their anchor, their proof that healing was possible. One afternoon in spring, when the grass was finally green again and the air smelled of rain and new growth, Mara stood at the fence watching Sable graze with the herd. Harlan stood beside her, his hands resting on the top rail. "You did good," he said. "She did good," Mara corrected, nodding toward Sable. "I just listened. That's all. I just paid attention." Harlan smiled, his weathered face crinkling. "Your daddy would be proud. Couldn't have asked for better." Mara's throat tightened. She pulled the last journal from her jacket pocket. She'd read it cover to cover 100 times, memorizing every word, every sketch, every note of hope and fear. On the final page, her father had written in shaken handwriting, as if he knew his time was running short. "I don't know if I'll ever find a way to use what I've found. The lawyers are circling. The bank is calling. I'm out of time and out of options. But I know this land is worth saving, not because of what's under it, because of what it holds. Home, safety, a future, a place where things can grow." If you're reading this, Mara, I hope you found a way. I hope you're standing on this land with the sun on your face. I hope you know I tried. I hope you know I loved you. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. Mara closed the book carefully. She had found a way. Not because of the ore, though that had saved everything. Because of a horse nobody wanted. A horse who knew where the truth was buried. A horse who refused to give up, who carried a secret for years until the right person was ready to listen. Sable lifted her head from the grass, ears forward, and looked directly at Mara. Their eyes met across the distance. The mare's gaze was calm, knowing, at peace. Mara smiled. She whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for waiting. Thank you for knowing." In the fading light of the high plains, the wind was still blowing. It would always blow. But it didn't feel cold anymore. It didn't feel harsh or punishing or endless. It felt like a promise, like a beginning, like the sound of a door opening after years of being locked. The refuge grew. More horses came. More lives were saved. And at the center of it all stood Sable, the broken mare who carried a miracle, who proved that sometimes the most damaged among us are the ones guarding the greatest treasures, waiting patiently for someone brave enough to see them, to trust them, to follow where they lead. If this story moved you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. Share it with someone who believes that even broken things can carry miracles, that even the lost can find their way home, that sometimes salvation comes not in the form we expect, but in the quiet insistence of a creature who refuses to let us give up.